The more I study the imagery of ancient Greek vases, the more fascinating it becomes. Everything painted on the pottery has a purpose. Many drawings I used to think were random decorations, and they turned out to be much more than that. They are objects that provide context for the scene to immerse you in the imagery. When researching the vase depictions for combat sports, the technical details in the movements, including the foot placement, the torque of the bodies, and the technique itself, led me to the conclusion that the people drawing these images were themselves practitioners or experts in combat sports. And because the same level of detail and accuracy does not exist in mythological depictions of combat, we see that there was a certain subset of vase painters that specialized specifically in drawing combat sport depictions. Now I think something similar might be going on with the pottery displays of gymnasiums, training, and athletics in general. These paintings show us not only some of the methods that were used in their practice, but also some of the equipment. Pickaxes, javelins, small spears, the discus, and of course the halteres. Halteres were small weights used specifically for exercises like pix atremisin, meant to build the shoulders and grip strength, but also for jumping, throwing, running, and more. But these halteres were not heavy. They ranged between 2 and 9 kilograms, which for my American friends is 2 and 9 kilograms. But we know that the ancient Greeks knew and understood the concept of progressive overload. Take, for example, the story of Milon of Croton, who was said to carry a calf around the stadium every day until the calf grew to a full-sized bull. This is obviously a mythicized retelling, as many stories of Milon tend to be. But its existence shows us that ancient Greeks understood that adding a bit more weight every so often leads to the ability to progressively lift more. In addition, we also have physical archaeological evidence, like the rock of Vivon found in Olympia, where we see an inscription that tells us that this son of Phoreus lifted the stone 143.5 kilograms over his head with one hand. And there are worn grooves, finger marks, where the stone would have been lifted, so we know that they weren't lying. It's difficult to believe that anyone would reach that level of strength without training and specifically without using progressive overload. So what kind of tools could they have used to achieve such feats? According to modern literature, the only thing they could have used were heavy stones and resistance from training partners. But neither of the two methods can really allow you to properly measure the increment in weight that you need in order to measure progress. Stones vary vastly in weight, and small differences are difficult to tell depending on the shape of the stone. Also, the resistance from training partners is wildly inconsistent. Surely there must have been something else. Another tool I found on vase paintings are these massive jars that could easily be filled with a liquid to a certain point, marked, and then additional liquid could be added as the athlete grew stronger. There's even an image of one piston squatting one of these jars, which is itself quite a feat of strength. But these jars do not allow for the range of motion required for a large array of exercises. And the pottery depictions of these vases only appear in symposiums, so not in an athletic setting. This wouldn't do. But when researching for an article I'm writing on ancient Hellenic Pali, which is the ancient Greek version of the sport of wrestling, whose rule set has nothing to do with modern Greco-Roman or freestyle, by the way, I stumbled upon this line, which has escaped scholars studying the topic. This line is from a fragment of a 2,400-year-old text written by comic poet Crates from around the 5th century BCE. This line only appears once in Julius Pollux, a Greek scholar and grammarian of the 2nd century CE. He wrote the Onomastikon, which was a thesaurus of ancient Attic Greek terms and phrases. In this work, the line from Crates actually survived. He tells us that it comes from a play called Heroes. So what does this line say? Strictly speaking, word to word, it can be translated to weights, bags, use the size. In other words, make use of the bags as a weight because of their size. It is an imperative instruction. Someone is telling a trainee to use the bag which is larger and heavier than the halteres as a weight. This is the evidence that bags were actually used in training, particularly for lifting and most likely for progressive overload. Why? Because you can add material to a bag and know that the bag is now heavier, and once it is filled, you can change the material to begin an even heavier progression. seeds, sand, gravel, iron, and so on. And the context we get from Pollux with regard to where he inserted this line tells us it was used for athletic purposes, and perhaps by wrestlers, given that wrestling terms immediately followed this line. He also tells us that this bag was called sakon or saktan, which is actually where the English word sack comes from. Now, there were other bags that were filled with sand and other materials in an athletic setting, namely the korikos, which was a punching bag and existed in various sizes. It is very rarely depicted on ancient Greek vases, but it does exist. One depicting mythology, the other likely depicting a theatrical play, with a fighter kicking the korikos made from pigskin. The sandbag used for weightlifting would also explain the korikion, a room in the palestra which was kind of like a gymnasium. Many scholars doubted that there was a room solely dedicated to punching bags and suggested it was used for luncheons as well. But rather than luncheons, a common space for punching bags and other sandbags for lifting or training seems more appropriate and far more plausible. In the end, what this all goes to show is that researching one aspect of ancient Hellenic athletics, in this case wrestling, can reveal key information about other, often entirely unrelated, aspects of training. And even something small, like the use of sandbags for weight, opens a new door to understanding the intricacies of the tetras workout routine, which I've made several videos about on the channel, and reconstructions of which you can find on Ko-Fi and Patreon. These routines are also prepared with reconstructions of the ancient Hellenic Mediterranean diet that you can adapt to your own schedule. Any and all purchases help me continue my research and the path to writing a book on Pankration for Routledge, which graciously gave me an extension to the deadline for completing the work, something I can still only finish with your support. Cheers to everyone who has supported me along the way, and I'll catch you in the next video. Some very exciting content is lined up. Until next time.